The little black girl screamed in front of the house. "They hit my mother, she's dying." The giant farmer shocked everyone. The rain cut through the night like icy blades when small fists desperately pounded on the wooden door of the farmhouse. Jacob Stone opened the door and found a girl of only 7, soaked to the bone, shivering not only from the cold but from sheer terror. "Please, sir," Aisha cried between sobs. "They hit my mom, she can't get up, she's bleeding a lot." Jacob was 45 years old and knew that look. It wasn't the first time he had seen absolute fear in a child's eyes. 20 years in the army in conflict zones had taught him to recognize when someone needed to be saved immediately. "Where is she?" he asked, already grabbing the keys to his truck. "In the yellow house on Pine Street, Derek." She drank again, and the girl's voice broke. "Derek Thompson." Jacob knew that name well. City employee, son of an influential family, always bragging at the bar about how he kept order at home. The kind of man the town respected during the day, and who beat women at night, as he drove down the muddy road. Jacob watched Aisha in the rearview mirror. The girl was in shock, but her eyes revealed a strength that should not exist in someone so young. It was the same strength he had seen in children in refugee camps, the brutal resilience that is born when you need to survive the unbearable. "My mother always said you were different from the other men in town," Aisha murmured. "She said you don't talk much, but you have kind eyes." Jacob didn't answer, but something stirred in his chest. 5 years ago, since retiring from the army and buying that isolated farm, he had deliberately distanced himself from the town's problems. He wanted peace, silence, a life without violence. But when they saw the yellow house, Jacob realized that some ghosts from the past never leave us completely. Maya was lying on the floor, one eye swollen, her lips split, purple marks on her neck. Derek was sitting in the armchair drinking beer as if nothing had happened. "What do you want here, Stone?" Derek growled, staggering to his feet. "This is a family matter." Jacob watched the scene in silence. Derek was smaller than him, but arrogant in a way that only cowardly men can be. The kind who hit women because they know they can't fight back. "The girl asked me for help," Jacob said, his voice calm but laden with something that made Derek hesitate for a second. "Oh, sure, the lone hero came to save the day," Derek laughed, but there was nervousness in his voice. "You have no idea who you're messing with. Old man, my father knows everyone in this town." As Derek continued talking, Jacob was mentally calculating distance to the door. Weapon positions, escape routes, 20 years of military training don't fade easily. But it was when Derek pointed his finger at Aisha and said, "This little girl is going to learn not to stick her nose where it doesn't belong," that something changed in the air of the room. Jacob took a step forward, just one. But Derek immediately backed away. "You're going to back away from them," Jacob said, his voice low like the rumble of a distant engine. Now Derek tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced. There was something in the eyes of that silent farmer that he couldn't identify. Something dangerous. If you've ever seen injustice being committed right in front of you and felt that anger boiling in your chest, then you know exactly what Jacob was feeling at that moment. And if this story of courage and justice is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next would forever change the lives of everyone involved. And you won't want to miss a second of this twist. Derek didn't expect Jacob to simply carry Maya in his arms and take her to his truck. Even less so that Aisha would run after him, grabbing the farmer's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Hey, where do you think you're going with my family?" Derek shouted, staggering after them in the rain. Jacob didn't answer. He just carefully placed Maya in the passenger seat and helped Aisha climb in behind her. His movements were precise, efficient, like someone accustomed to extracting people from danger zones. "You can't just take them!" Derek yelled, punching the hood of the truck. "This is kidnapping. I'm calling the police." It was then that Jacob finally turned around. His eyes met Derek's, and for a second, the smaller man felt something cold run down his spine. There was something in that gaze that Derek couldn't quite identify, something that made men far more dangerous than him instinctively back down. "Call them," Jacob said, his voice low but laden with an authority that made Derek hesitate. "Tell them you beat a woman nearly to death in front of your daughter." Derek tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced. "You don't know who you're messing with, Stone. My father is the mayor of this town. My family built half the buildings you see around here." Jacob started the truck. The engine roared in the rainy night. "And you," Derek continued, banging on the hood again, "you're just a traumatized little soldier that nobody wants around. Everyone knows you came back from the war with a screw loose." For the first time, Jacob smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile war veterans give when someone makes the mistake of underestimating them. "Maybe," Jacob said, putting the truck in gear, "but at least I don't hit women." The last words Derek heard were the sound of tires in the mud as the truck drove away. Taking his family away from him, At Jacob's farm, Maya lay unconscious on the living room couch. Covered with clean blankets, Aisha refused to leave her mother's side, so Jacob brought pillows and improvised a bed on the floor next to the couch. "Is she going to be okay?" asked Aisha, her eyes still swollen from crying. Jacob looked at Maya's injuries. The black eye, the split lip, the marks on her neck. He had seen similar injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan. He knew how to recognize the signs of someone who had been systematically tortured. "She'll be fine," Jacob said. And for the first time since he had found her, Aisha smiled. What the girl didn't know was that Jacob was lying. Maya had signs of head trauma, possibly broken ribs. She needed to go to a hospital. But Jacob knew that Derek had contacts all over the city. At the hospital, he could easily make up a story, claim that Maya had fallen or hurt herself. Jacob picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Dr. Martinez, it's Jacob Stone, yes. I know it's been a long time. I need a favor, doctor." Eduardo Martinez had been a military doctor at the same base as Jacob. Now he had a private practice 2 towns south. More importantly, he was one of the only people Jacob truly trusted while waiting for the doctor to arrive. Jacob sat in the armchair, watching the girl mourn her mother. Something stirred inside him, a cold, calculated fury he knew well. It was the same feeling he had when he identified a high-value target on the battlefield. Derek Thompson had just become a high-value target. Jacob's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello, Stone." The voice was Derek's, but different, more controlled, more dangerous. "You made a very big mistake tonight, really?" Jacob stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the night remained dark. "My father has already called Sheriff Henderson tomorrow morning. You will be arrested for kidnapping and trespassing. And when I get my family back, I will make sure Maya never has the courage to run away from home again." Jacob was silent for a long moment. "Are you still there, soldier boy?" "I'm listening," Jacob said calmly. "Good. Because I want you to understand one thing. This town is mine, the sheriff is mine, the judge is a family friend. You may have played hero for one night, but tomorrow you'll find out how the real world works." Derek laughed, a cruel, confident sound. "You should have stayed on your little farm, Stone, away from other people's problems. Now you're going to find out that messing with the Thompson family was the biggest mistake of your pathetic life." The call ended. Jacob put the phone away and returned to the armchair. Aisha had fallen asleep on the floor, one hand still touching her mother's arm. Maya was breathing heavily, but she was alive. Derek Thompson thought he knew Jacob Stone. He thought he was just a traumatized, isolated veteran, easy to intimidate and unable to defend himself. What Derek didn't know was that Jacob Stone had been a special operations sergeant. Not the kind of soldier who sits around on secure bases. The kind who gets sent in to solve problems that governments pretend don't exist. And Derek Thompson had just become exactly the kind of problem Jacob knew how to solve best. As the night wore on and Dr. Martinez discreetly tended to Maya's injuries, Jacob made a few calls of his own to people Derek would never hear of, but who knew very well the weight of the name Jacob Stone in circles where reputation is measured in results, not family names. What that arrogant civil servant failed to realize was that every threat, every show of political power, only fueled something inside Jacob that had been trained to never give up, never back down, and always complete the mission. And now, Derek had inadvertently turned the protection of Maya and Aisha into the most important mission of Jacob's life. Subscribe to the channel if you want to find out how a man underestimated for his quietness can be exactly the kind of storm that arrogant, privileged people never saw coming. The next morning, Sheriff Henderson showed up at Jacob's farm at exactly 7 a.m., accompanied by Derek and 2 deputies, Dr. Martinez had spent the early hours of the morning treating Maya and confirmed what Jacob already suspected. Head trauma, 3 broken ribs, clear signs of chronic domestic violence. "Jacob Stone," Henderson announced, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. "You are under arrest for kidnapping, trespassing, and interference in family matters." Derek smiled beside the sheriff, his eyes shining with cruel satisfaction. "I warned you that you didn't know who you were messing with." Soldier, Jacob looked calmly at the warrant. It was signed by Judge Morrison, the same last name as the street where Derek lived. An old family in town, as he had said. "Can I see Maya and Aisha first?" Jacob asked, his voice controlled. "They're already in the car," Derek replied, pointing to his pickup truck where Maya, still visibly injured, was sitting next to Aisha. The girl pressed her face against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. Jacob allowed them to handcuff him, but his eyes never left Derek for a second. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Derek laughed loudly. "It's over. You're going to spend the next few years in prison, and I'll make sure Maya never has the courage to run away again." What Derek didn't see was Jacob discreetly pressing a small device in his pocket. A transmitter he had activated during the conversation. At the city jail, Jacob was placed in a small, damp cell. The public defender assigned to him, a young recent graduate named David Chun, seemed more interested in getting the case over with quickly than defending his client. "Look, Mr. Stone," David said, flipping through the papers without much interest. "The Thompson family is very powerful here. My advice is to accept a plea bargain. We might be able to get it down to 6 months if you plead guilty." Jacob stared at the lawyer for a long moment. "How old are you, kid?" 26. "Why? Have you ever seen someone beaten nearly to death?" David hesitated. "Well, no, but that's not relevant." "2, it is," Jacob interrupted, "because you're about to see photos that will give you nightmares." Jacob pulled an envelope from inside his coat. Dr. Martinez had meticulously documented all of Maya's injuries during treatment. Detailed medical photographs, x-rays of broken ribs, a complete report signed by a doctor with military credentials. David opened the envelope and his face instantly paled. "My God." Now imagine a 7-year-old child seeing this happen to his own mother. Jacob continued, "Derek Thompson is not a kidnapping victim. He's a monster who almost killed a woman." David closed the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "That changes everything. But we still need more evidence. It's his word against yours. Who says it's just my word?" Jacob smiled for the first time since he had been arrested. It was time to reveal part of what he had prepared during the night. "Dr. Martinez wasn't the only person I called last night. Do you know Captain Williams from the military police?" David shook his head. "He was my commander for 8 years. He's retired now, but he still has contacts everywhere that matters. And it just so happens that domestic violence is a federal crime when it involves systematic patterns of torture." Jacob leaned forward, his voice low but laden with authority. "Derek Thompson made the mistake of threatening a decorated veteran on a recorded call. I used military equipment to document every word he said last night." David's eyes widened. "You recorded the conversation?" "Not only did I record it, I streamed it live to a secure server that Captain Williams monitors 24 hours a day. Every threat, every display of local corruption, every word about how he controls sheriffs and judges." Jacob leaned back in his chair, watching David process the information. "Derek Thompson thinks he's playing chess in a small town. He doesn't realize he's just stepped onto a federal battlefield." Meanwhile, Derek was at home celebrating his victory with whiskey and phone calls to friends. Maya was locked in her room with Aisha, the two of them hugging on the bed, while Derek told everyone how he had put that crazy soldier in his place. What Derek didn't know was that every call was being monitored by equipment Jacob had strategically placed around the property during his previous visits to town. Small military devices impossible to detect without specialized equipment. At 2 p.m., a black car with federal license plates pulled up in front of Derek's house. 2 FBI agents got out, accompanied by Captain Williams in military uniform. Derek opened the door. Still smiling from the hangover of victory. "Can I help you?" "Derek Thompson, I'm Special Agent Rodriguez, FBI. You need to come with us to answer some questions about domestic violence and obstruction of justice." The smile instantly disappeared from Derek's face. "There must be some mistake. I'm the victim here. A man broke into my house and kidnapped my family." Captain Williams stepped forward, his presence imposing. "Mr. Thompson, you called Jacob Stone yesterday at 11:47 p.m. and made specific threats against him and his family. You also bragged about bribing local officials to persecute a military veteran." Derek felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "How do you know about?" "Because it was all broadcast live to federal servers." Agent Rodriguez replied, "Including your confessions of domestic violence and local corruption." As Derek was being handcuffed, Maya appeared at the door with Aisha in her arms. For the first time in years, she didn't try to hide or justify the injuries. "He almost killed me," Maya said, her voice firm. "In front of my daughter." By the end of the day, Jacob was released from the local jail with formal apologies. Sheriff Henderson had been suspended pending investigation, and Judge Morrison was being questioned about his ties to the Thompson family. David Chun, now fully invested in the case, met Jacob outside the police station. "How did you plan all this?" he asked, still impressed. Jacob looked up at the evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Derek Thompson made 2 mistakes. First, he thought domestic violence was a local problem. Second, he threatened someone who swore to protect the defenseless. He turned to David, his eyes reflecting a determination that made the young lawyer realize he was in the presence of someone who understood war in a way he would never comprehend. "But this is only the beginning, kid. Derek Thompson still doesn't understand the extent of the trouble he's gotten himself into at the farm that night." Maya and Aisha were safe again, but this time, Jacob knew that their safety would be permanent. The monitoring devices were still active, documenting Derek's every move, every phone call, every attempt at retaliation. What Derek couldn't understand was that Jacob wasn't just protecting two people. He had turned the situation into a full-scale military operation with 24-hour surveillance, federal backup, and a network of veterans ready to act if necessary. While Derek spent his first night in a federal cell imagining that everything would be back to normal in a few days, Jacob was finalizing Phase 2 of a plan that would destroy not only Derek, but the entire network of corruption that allowed men like him to operate with impunity. The former soldier had learned long ago that real war is not won in a single battle. It is won by cutting off all of the enemy supply lines, eliminating their allies, and ensuring that they never again have the resources to rise up. Derek Thompson was about to discover that he had declared war on someone who had turned the destruction of enemies into an exact science. Derek Thompson woke up in his federal cell thinking that everything would be resolved with a few phone calls. After all, his father was the mayor, he had expensive lawyers, and this was just a misunderstanding that would be cleared up in a matter of hours. He didn't know that Jacob had spent the previous night planting listening devices in strategic locations around the city, not just at Derek's house, but at the mayor's office, the local police station, and even Judge Morrison's office at 8 a.m. When Derek finally got to use the prison phone, his first call was to his father. "Dad, you need to get me out of here now. That crazy soldier, Derek." Mayor Thompson's voice sounded strange, tense. "Where are you calling from?" "From federal prison. They arrested me because of that Maya. You need to call Henderson, Morrison, whoever you need to." On the other end of the line, Agent Rodriguez smiled as he listened to the conversation being transmitted live to the FBI server. Every word was being recorded with crystal clarity by the military equipment Jacob had installed. "Derek, listen carefully," whispered the mayor. "Don't say anything else on the phone. They're investigating the whole family. The FBI was here at 6 a.m. with search and seizure warrants." Derek felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What do you mean? That's impossible. It's just a domestic dispute. They have recordings, Derek. Recordings of you threatening a military veteran. Recordings of me promising to influence the sheriff. Recordings of Judge Morrison fixing verdicts." The call ended abruptly. Derek stood holding the phone, cold sweat running down his face when he noticed other inmates watching him curiously. One of them, a black man in his 40s with scars on his face, approached. "Are you Derek Thompson? The guy who beats women?" Derek instinctively backed away. "This is a misunderstanding." The man laughed. "A humorless sound, man. Your story has gone around the whole prison. You beat a black woman in front of her daughter. You know what the problem is with people like you in here?" Other inmates began to approach, forming a circle around Derek. "The problem is that in here," the man continued, "there's no mayor daddy, no family name, no political influence. In here, you're just another coward who beats women." While Derek faced his first lesson in how the world worked without privilege, Jacob was at the farm receiving a call from Captain Williams. "Jacob, we just finished the search. It's worse than we thought." "What do you mean?" The corruption wasn't just local. Derek was selling confidential city information to construction companies. His father had been facilitating fraudulent contracts for years, and Judge Morrison, well, he signed sentences without even reading the cases. Jacob looked out the window where Maya was in the garden teaching Aisha how to plant flowers. The girl was laughing for the first time since she had arrived at the farm. "How many families did they destroy?" Jacob asked. 17 domestic violence cases filed without proper investigation in the last 3 years. All involving poor women, most of them black. Derek threatened the victims. His father pressured the sheriff, and Morrison made sure the cases never went to trial. Jacob clenched his fists. 17 women, 17 families. "But here's the best part," Williams continued. "Remember the devices you installed? They captured Derek confessing everything to his lawyer. He thought he had attorney-client privilege, but he didn't know the lawyer was being investigated for bribery. At 2 p.m., Derek was taken to a room where he met his lawyer, Dr. Peaton, a nervous man with glasses who couldn't look his client in the eye. "Derek, we need to talk about a deal with the district attorney deal." "What deal?" "You're going to get me out of here." Dr. Peaton opened a folder, his hands shaking slightly. "They have you on 17 counts of domestic violence, obstruction of justice, corruption, and now conspiracy against civil rights conspiracy." "What?" "Systematic domestic violence against black women constitutes a federal hate crime. Derek, you're looking at 25 years in federal prison." Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the concrete floor. "This is crazy. I'm white, educated. My family built this city. Your family is being investigated for the same organized crime. Derek, your father was arrested 2 hours ago. All of the family's assets have been frozen. City Hall has been taken over by the federal government. The room spun around Derek. 25 years, his father arrested, his family ruined, and there's more. The lawyer continued, consulting his notes. Maya Carter has filed a civil suit. She is being represented by a law firm that specializes in civil rights. They are seeking $2 million in damages, $2 million, but she's a victim of systematic domestic violence who was protected by a war veteran while you tried to corrupt the judicial system to keep the abuse unpunished. Derek slumped into his chair, reality finally sinking into his privileged mind. Jacob Stone hadn't just defeated him. He had systematically destroyed everything he stood for. At that moment, the door opened and Agent Rodriguez entered with a tablet in his hand. "Mr. Thompson, we want to show you something interesting we found on your father's cell phone." On the screen was a text message the mayor had sent to Derek weeks earlier. "That soldier Stone is interfering too much. We need to take care of him permanently." "This," said Rodriguez, "turns your domestic violence situation into a conspiracy to threaten a military veteran. We're talking about domestic terrorism now." Derek looked at the screen, then at the lawyer, then at the agent. For the first time in his life, he realized there was no one to save him. No last name, no influence, no privilege could reverse what Jacob Stone had set in motion. The former soldier had turned a domestic violence situation into a full-blown military operation, documenting every crime, every threat, every act of corruption, and then handed it all over, gift-wrapped to the FBI. As Derek began to understand the extent of his downfall, Jacob was on the porch of the farmhouse watching Maya teach Aisha to ride. The girls squealed with delight every time the mare took a step, her laughter echoing across the field. David Chun, the young lawyer, showed up at the ranch with a briefcase full of documents. "Jacob, you won't believe it." Derek not only confessed everything, he begged to make a deal. He offered to testify against his father, against the judge, against the entire network of corruption. Jacob nodded, unsurprised. Men like Derek always betray their allies when the pressure mounts. "But here's the interesting part," David smiled. "Maya is not just going to receive compensation. The federal investigation discovered that the city had embezzled funds intended for social programs. 17 families who were victims of the corrupt system will receive compensation." Jacob watched Maya help Aisha down from the mare, the two of them laughing together. It wasn't just one family that had been saved. It was an entire community. What Derek Thompson couldn't understand, even now in his federal cell, was that Jacob Stone had never fought just for Maya and Aisha. He had identified an entire system of oppression and used his military skills to destroy it completely. And while Derek spent his first night truly without privileges, Jacob finally found peace knowing that some wars are worth fighting, especially those where you fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. But this story still had one final twist that would change everything everyone thought they knew about justice: power, and the price some people are willing to pay to protect the innocent. 6 months later, Maya opened the doors of Hope Support Center for Women Victims of Violence, funded entirely with the $2 million in compensation she received. Jacob stood beside her, holding Aisha, who now smiled without fear. "Mommy, how many families are we going to help today?" asked the girl, watching the line of women waiting for assistance. "As many as needed. My daughter, Derek Thompson, was serving the 3rd month of a 25-year sentence in federal prison. No privileges, no influence, just another number in the system he once manipulated. His father, the former mayor, shared the same wing, both marked by a reputation for corruption and exploiting the vulnerable. During his lawyer's last visit, Derek had desperately asked if there was any chance of an appeal. The answer was simple. Jacob Stone documented every crime you committed. There is no legal argument against irrefutable federal evidence. Meanwhile, Jacob had turned his farm into a temporary shelter, working in partnership with Maya's center. 17 families had already passed through, finding safety while rebuilding their lives. Dr. Martinez became the center's official doctor, offering free care. David Chun opened a law firm specializing in civil rights with Jacob as a silent partner. "Do you know what your biggest mistake was, Derek?" Jacob said during his only visit to prison. "You thought violence was synonymous with power? True power is building bridges where others build walls." Derek just stared through the bars, realizing too late that he had underestimated not just one man, but a force for change that now benefited hundreds of people. Jacob's best revenge wasn't destroying Derek. It was building a legacy that would make it impossible for other men like him to operate with impunity. He turned one night of domestic violence into a quiet revolution that would change lives forever. Jacob proved that when you fight for the defenseless, you don't just change their lives, you become unbeatable. Subscribe to the channel for more stories.